On a humid morning in June 2005, in the small textile town of Gaffney, South Carolina, a young mother named Jessica Marie Coleman kissed her 5-year-old daughter goodbye and left for her shift at the local diner. She never arrived. Her car was found 3 days later, parked behind an abandoned warehouse near the railroad tracks, keys still in the ignition, purse on the passenger seat, and her cell phone displaying 17 missed calls. There was no sign of struggle, no blood, no witnesses. Jessica Marie Coleman had simply vanished from a route she drove every single day. The question that would haunt Cherokee County for nearly 2 decades was not just where Jessica had gone, but who among those closest to her knew exactly what had happened that morning. Gaffney sits in the upper corner of South Carolina, just 40 miles from the North Carolina border, a town built on cotton mills and red clay. In 2005, it was home to approximately 13,000 people, most of whom had lived there all their lives, attended the same churches, and knew each other's business whether they wanted to or not. The downtown stretched along Limestone Street, lined with brick storefronts that had seen better decades. The Peach Stand restaurant stood on the corner of Frederick Street, a fixture since 1937, with its faded awning and the perpetual smell of coffee and bacon grease that drifted through the screen door. Jessica Marie Coleman was 26 years old. She had grown up in the neighboring town of Blacksburg, married her high school sweetheart Marcus Coleman when she was 19, and given birth to their daughter Emma 2 years later. Those who knew Jessica described her as reliable, quiet, someone who kept to herself, but always had a kind word. She wore her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail for work, favored simple gold hoop earrings, and had a small tattoo of a butterfly on her left ankle that she had gotten on her 21st birthday. She worked the morning shift at the Peach Stand 6 days a week, arriving at 6 in the morning and finishing at 2 in the afternoon so she could pick Emma up from kindergarten. Marcus Coleman worked at the Hamrick Mills textile plant on the east side of town, operating machinery on the second shift that ran from 3 in the afternoon until 11 at night. He was 28, tall and lean, with calloused hands and a quiet demeanor that some interpreted as shyness and others read as something harder to name. The couple lived in a small rental house on Petty Street, a narrow residential road where houses sat close together, and neighbors could hear arguments through open windows on summer nights. Clear's throat the morning of June 14, 2005, began like any other Tuesday. The sun rose at 6:13. The temperature was already 78 degrees by 5:30, promising another day where the humidity would press down like a wet blanket. Jessica woke at 5:15, as she always did, moving quietly through the small house so as not to wake Emma, who slept in the second bedroom with its walls painted pale yellow and glow-in-the-dark stars stuck to the ceiling. Marcus was already awake. He had been up since 4:30, which was unusual. He told investigators later that he could not sleep, that he had been restless all night. Jessica made coffee in the small kitchen. The pot was an old Mr. Coffee machine that gurgled and hissed. She poured herself a cup in a white ceramic mug with a chip on the rim. She did not eat breakfast. She rarely did. At 5:45, she went into Emma's room and kissed her daughter on the forehead. Emma stirred but did not wake. Jessica told Marcus she was leaving. He was sitting at the kitchen table, still in the clothes he had worn the day before, staring at his hands. She asked him if he was feeling all right. He said yes. She said she would see him that afternoon. She picked up her purse, a worn brown leather bag with a broken zipper, and walked out the front door. Her car was a 1998 Honda Civic, dark green, with a dent in the rear bumper from where someone had backed into her at the grocery store parking lot 2 months earlier. She had been meaning to get it fixed but had not gotten around to it. The car started on the first try. It always did. The drive from Petty Street to the Peach Stand restaurant took exactly 11 minutes if you caught the lights right. Jessica had made this drive hundreds of times. She never arrived. At 6:20 in the morning, the restaurant's owner, Dorothy Me Henderson, a 62-year-old woman who had run the peach stand for 30 years, stood behind the counter and looked at the clock. Jessica was late. This was unusual. In the 4 years Jessica had worked there, she had been late exactly twice, both times because Emma had been sick. Dorothy picked up the phone and called Jessica's cell phone. It rang and went to voicemail. Dorothy left a message. She waited 15 minutes and called again. No answer. At 6:45, she called the Coleman house. Marcus answered on the third ring. His voice was thick, as if he had been sleeping, though he claimed later he had been awake the entire time. Dorothy asked if Jessica had left for work. Marcus said yes, she had left around 5:45. Dorothy said she had not arrived. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said maybe she had stopped for gas. Dorothy said maybe. She hung up and waited. At 7:15, when Jessica still had not appeared and had not called, Dorothy called the Gaffney Police Department. Officer Raymond Tucker took the initial call. He was 34 years old, a 10-year veteran of the department, and he had heard dozens of reports of people who were late for work or had not called home. Most turned out to be nothing. A flat tire, a misunderstanding, a stopped clock, but something in Dorothy's voice made him pay attention. He took down the information. Jessica Marie Coleman, 26 years old, dark hair, 5'4", approximately 120 pounds. Last seen leaving her home on Petty Street at approximately 5:45 in the morning, driving a dark green Honda Civic. He said he would look into it. By 10 in the morning, Officer Tucker had driven the route from Petty Street to the peach stand 3 times. He checked the side streets. He checked the parking lots of the closed businesses. He called the local hospitals. Nothing. At 11:30, he went to the Coleman house. Marcus answered the door. He was still in the same clothes. Officer Tucker asked when he had last seen his wife. Marcus said around 5:45 that morning. Officer Tucker asked if they had argued. Marcus said no. Officer Tucker asked if Jessica had seemed upset or worried about anything. Marcus said no, she had seemed normal. Officer Tucker asked if there was anywhere Jessica might have gone, anyone she might have visited. Marcus said no, she would have gone to work. Clear's throat. The officer noticed something as he stood on the small concrete porch. Marcus did not ask questions. He did not demand to know what was being done to find his wife. He did not offer to help search. He simply answered the questions he was asked and waited. His hands hung at his sides. His face showed nothing. At 2:30 in the afternoon, a maintenance worker at the old limestone textile warehouse, a man named Gerald Price, who was 61 years old and had worked in maintenance his entire life, was checking the perimeter of the building when he noticed a car parked behind the loading dock. It was a dark green Honda Civic. The engine was off. The doors were locked. Gerald walked around the vehicle and peered through the windows. He saw a purse on the passenger seat. He saw keys in the ignition. He saw nothing else. He called the police. Officer Tucker arrived at 2:53. He recognized the vehicle immediately from the description Dorothy Henderson had given. He called for backup. Within 20 minutes, 3 police vehicles surrounded the Honda. The doors were unlocked using a slim jim. The interior was examined. The keys were still in the ignition, turned to the off position. The purse was opened. Inside was Jessica's wallet, containing her driver's license, $23 in cash, 2 credit cards, and a photograph of Emma. Her cell phone was in the center console. The battery was at 12%. There were 17 missed calls, 14 from Dorothy Henderson, 3 from Marcus Coleman. The last call Marcus had made was at 8:15 that morning. There were no signs of struggle inside the vehicle. No blood, no torn fabric, no indication that anything violent had occurred. The car had been driven here and parked. Someone had turned off the engine and walked away. The odometer showed the vehicle had traveled 12.4 miles since the last time it had been filled with gas, which according to a receipt found in the glove compartment had been 3 days earlier at a station on Route 29. The distance from the Coleman house to this warehouse was 3.2 miles. The distance from the Coleman house to the peach stand was 4.1 miles. The math did not add up. By 6 o'clock that evening, a full search operation was underway. The Gaffney Police Department was joined by the Cherokee County Sheriff's Office. Volunteers from the community began arriving. Friends of Jessica, members of her church, people who had never met her but had heard she was missing and wanted to help. They formed search lines and walked through the woods behind the warehouse. They checked drainage ditches. They knocked on doors in the surrounding neighborhood, asking if anyone had seen or heard anything unusual that morning. Marcus Coleman arrived at the warehouse at 7:15. He was driven there by his brother, Daniel Coleman, who lived 2 towns over in Shelby, North Carolina. Marcus stood at the edge of the police tape and stared at Jessica's car. An officer asked him if he recognized the vehicle. He said yes. The officer asked if he could think of any reason Jessica would have come to this location. Marcus said no. The officer asked if Jessica knew anyone who worked at the warehouse. Marcus said he did not think so. The warehouse had been closed for 3 years. There was no one to know. Those who were present that evening, volunteers and officers alike, would later recall that Marcus did not cry. He did not call out Jessica's name. He did not join the search. He stood at the edge of the tape, his hands in his pockets, his face blank, and watched. After 20 minutes, he asked if he could leave. He said he needed to pick up Emma from his mother's house. An officer said yes, but asked him to remain available for further questions. Marcus said he would. He turned and walked back to his brother's truck. The search continued through the night. Floodlights were brought in. Cadaver dogs were called from Columbia. They arrived at 11:30 and were walked through the woods and around the warehouse. The dogs did not alert to anything. By 3 in the morning, the search was scaled back. Officers and volunteers were exhausted. They would resume at daybreak. Jessica Marie Coleman had been missing for 21 hours. Her car had been found. Her belongings had been found. But Jessica herself had vanished as completely as if she had never existed at all. Part 2. The investigation over the next 72 hours. The search for Jessica Coleman expanded to cover nearly 40 square miles of Cherokee County. Teams of volunteers, some numbering as many as 200 people at a time, combed through fields, forests, and abandoned properties. The local news stations picked up the story. By the 3rd day, Jessica's photograph was being shown on the evening broadcasts in Charlotte, Greenville, and Columbia. It was a picture from Emma's 4th birthday party, showing Jessica smiling, holding her daughter on her lap, a paper crown on her head. The image was printed on flyers that were posted on telephone poles, in store windows, and on bulletin boards throughout the county. The community response was immediate and overwhelming. The First Baptist Church on Limestone Street organized a prayer vigil on the courthouse lawn. More than 500 people attended, holding candles and singing hymns as the sun set. Dorothy Henderson from the Peach Stand set up a fund to help with search expenses and to support Emma. Within a week, the fund had raised over $6,000. People who had never met Jessica Coleman felt connected to her story, perhaps because it spoke to a fear that lived quietly in the back of every mind. That someone you love could simply disappear, and the world would continue as if nothing had changed. But while the public searched and prayed, investigators were beginning to notice things that did not align. Clear's throat. Detective William Hayes of the Cherokee County Sheriff's Office took over the case on June 16th, 48 hours after Jessica's car was discovered. Hayes was 46 years old, a 22-year veteran of law enforcement who had worked everything from robbery to domestic incidents. He was methodical, patient, and had a reputation for noticing details that others overlooked. He began by reconstructing Jessica's final known movements. The timeline, as it appeared on paper, was straightforward. Jessica left her home at approximately 5:45 in the morning. The drive to the Peach Stand should have taken 11 minutes. She should have arrived at 5:56. She did not. Her car was found at the limestone textile warehouse, 3.2 miles from her home, parked behind the building where it would not be visible from the road. The question was, when had it been parked there and by whom? Detective Hayes interviewed the neighbors on Petty Street. Mrs. Lorraine Gibson, who lived 2 houses down from the Colemans, said she had been up early that morning, as she always was, making breakfast for her husband before he left for work. She had been standing at her kitchen window, which faced the street, at approximately 5:40. She saw Jessica's car in the driveway. She did not see Jessica leave. She went back to the stove to flip the bacon, and when she looked out again a few minutes later, the car was gone. She estimated this was around 5:48 or 5:49. She did not see anyone else on the street at that time. Another neighbor, Mr. Thomas Renfro, who lived directly across from the Colemans, said he had been in his garage at approximately 6 in the morning, looking for a tool. He heard a car engine. He glanced out and saw what he thought was Jessica's Honda driving past, heading toward Frederick Street. He could not say for certain it was her car, only that it was a small green vehicle, and he had assumed it was hers. He did not see the driver. He went back to searching for his tool and thought nothing more of it. The warehouse where the car was found was 3.2 miles from the Coleman house. If Jessica had left at 5:45 and driven directly there, she would have arrived by 5:50 at the latest. But the car had 12.4 miles on the odometer since the last fill-up. That suggested the vehicle had been driven somewhere else first, or had taken a much longer route. Detective Hayes drove every possible path from Petty Street to the warehouse. The shortest route was 3.2 miles. The longest route, taking back roads and circling through town, was just under 9 miles. Even accounting for that, the odometer reading did not make sense. Then there was the matter of Marcus Coleman. Detective Hayes interviewed Marcus on June 17th at the sheriff's office. Marcus arrived alone. He wore jeans and a plaid button-down shirt. He sat in the interview room with his hands folded on the table. Detective Hayes asked him to walk through the morning of June 14th again, step by step. Marcus repeated what he had said before. He had woken early, around 4:30. He could not sleep. Jessica got up at 5:15. She made coffee. She got ready for work. She went into Emma's room to kiss her goodbye. She came back to the kitchen and said she was leaving. Marcus said he was sitting at the table. Jessica asked if he was feeling all right. He said yes. She left. Detective Hayes asked what time Jessica walked out the door. Marcus said approximately 5:45. Detective Hayes asked if Marcus had looked at a clock. Marcus said no. He was estimating based on when Jessica usually left. Detective Hayes asked what Marcus did after Jessica left. Marcus said he sat at the table for a while. Then he went to lie down. He said he must have fallen asleep because the next thing he knew, the phone was ringing. It was Dorothy Henderson asking if Jessica had left for work. Marcus looked at the clock. It was 6:45. Detective Hayes asked why Marcus had not called Jessica when she did not come home at her usual time in the afternoon. Marcus said he had assumed she picked up an extra shift or stopped somewhere after work. He said it had happened before, though when pressed, he could not remember a specific instance. Detective Hayes asked if Marcus and Jessica had argued recently. Marcus said no. Detective Hayes asked if their marriage was happy. Marcus said yes. Detective Hayes asked if Jessica had seemed worried or frightened about anything. Marcus said no. Detective Hayes made notes as Marcus spoke. He noted that Marcus's tone was flat. He noted that Marcus did not ask about the investigation, did not ask if there were any leads, did not ask what he could do to help. He simply answered questions and waited for the next one. Clear's throat. Those who knew Marcus from work at the textile plant described him as quiet, a man who kept to himself, who ate lunch alone and did not participate in the usual banter and jokes. His supervisor, a man named Carl Dodson, said Marcus had been a reliable employee for 7 years, rarely called in sick, never caused trouble. But Carl also said there was something about Marcus that made people uncomfortable, though he could not quite say what it was. A stillness, maybe. A lack of reaction to things that should have prompted some kind of response. Deputies whispered quietly in the break room at the sheriff's office. They said Marcus's behavior was off. They said the way he stood at the crime scene, staring at his wife's car with no expression, was not the reaction of a man whose wife had just vanished. They said the timeline did not add up. They said the odometer reading suggested someone had driven that car somewhere before parking it at the warehouse. They said Marcus had been awake early that morning, earlier than usual, and had been unable to sleep. They said all of this quietly because they had no proof, only instinct. The physical evidence was sparse. Jessica's car was processed thoroughly. Fingerprints were lifted from the steering wheel, the door handles, the gear shift. They all belonged to Jessica. There were no unknown prints, no fibers that did not belong, no blood, no sign of anyone else having been in the vehicle. The keys had been turned to the off position, which suggested someone had driven the car there, and then removed the keys from the ignition before placing them back. It was a small detail, but it stood out. Why remove the keys and then put them back? The cell phone records were examined. Jessica's phone showed the 17 missed calls. There were no outgoing calls after 5:30 on the morning of June 14th. The last text message she had sent was at 9:20 the night before, to Marcus, saying she was picking up milk on the way home. There were no calls or texts that suggested she was planning to meet anyone or go anywhere other than work. Marcus's phone records were also examined. He had called Jessica 3 times on the morning of June 14th. The first call was at 7:45, approximately an hour after Dorothy Henderson had called the house to say Jessica had not arrived at work. The second call was at 8:10. The third was at 8:15. All 3 calls went to voicemail. He did not call again after that. Detective Hayes found this curious. If your wife is missing, and she is not answering her phone, why would you only call 3 times in the span of 30 minutes and then stop? The search continued for 2 weeks. Teams of volunteers walked through forests and swamps. Divers checked the bottom of the Broad River. Helicopters flew over the county, using thermal imaging to look for any sign of a body. Nothing was found. Jessica Marie Coleman had disappeared as completely as if she had never been born. By the end of June, the search operations were scaled back. Volunteers returned to their jobs and their lives. The flyers on the telephone poles faded in the sun and were eventually torn down or covered by notices for yard sales and lost pets. The news stations moved on to other stories. Detective Hayes continued to work the case, but leads were drying up. The investigation slowed. By August, it had gone cold. Marcus Coleman returned to work at the textile plant. He picked Emma up from his mother's house each day and brought her home. Life, in its strange and inexorable way, continued. But the questions remained, hanging in the air like humidity, unspoken but always present. Part 3. The silence. By October of 2005, 4 months after Jessica Coleman vanished, the case had effectively stalled. Detective Hayes kept the file open on his desk, but without new evidence or witnesses, there was little he could do except wait and hope that someone would come forward. The Coleman house on Petty Street stood as it always had, small and quiet, with its peeling paint and overgrown lawn. Marcus still lived there with Emma, though neighbors noticed that lights were often on late into the night, and sometimes they could hear the sound of a child crying. For those who have ever doubted someone you love, who have felt that cold creep of suspicion that you cannot name but cannot shake, you understand the particular kind of torture it creates. You question your own instincts. You tell yourself you are wrong, that you are seeing shadows where there are none. But the doubt remains, eating away at certainty until you do not know what is real anymore. Marcus's mother, Linda Coleman, took Emma to stay with her in November. She told people it was temporary, just until Marcus got back on his feet. But those close to the family knew it was more than that. Linda had begun to notice things about her son that troubled her. The way he stared at nothing for long periods. The way he would not answer direct questions about Jessica. The way he seemed, in some fundamental way, absent. Emma, who had just turned 6 in September, was struggling. Her kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Patricia Hollies, reported to the school counselor that Emma had become withdrawn and was having difficulty concentrating. She drew pictures in class that were disturbing. Dark scribbles. Figures with no faces. In one drawing there was a car and a stick figure lying on the ground beside it. Mrs. Hollies asked Emma about the drawing. Emma said it was her mommy. Mrs. Hollies asked where her mommy was. Emma said she did not know, but she had a bad dream about her. The school counselor, a woman named Dr. Rebecca Flynn, met with Emma in December. She asked Emma if she remembered the morning her mother left for work. Emma said yes. Dr. Flynn asked what she remembered. Emma said she woke up and heard her parents talking in the kitchen. Dr. Flynn asked what they were saying. Emma said she could not hear the words, but they were not yelling. Then she heard the front door close. Dr. Flynn asked if Emma heard anything else. Emma was quiet for a long time. Then she said she heard her daddy's truck start. Dr. Flynn asked if Emma was sure. Emma nodded. Dr. Flynn asked what happened next. Emma said she went back to sleep. This information was passed along to Detective Hayes. He called Emma's grandmother, Linda Coleman, and asked if he could speak with Emma again. Linda was hesitant. She said Emma had been through enough, but she also said she wanted to know the truth. She brought Emma to the sheriff's office on a cold afternoon in January 2006. Emma sat in a room painted light blue, with toys in one corner and a two-way mirror on the wall. Detective Hayes sat across from her, and a child psychologist, Dr. Amanda Porter, sat beside her. They asked Emma if she remembered the morning her mother left. Emma said yes. They asked her to tell them what she remembered. Emma said she woke up because she heard a noise. It sounded like a door closing. Then she heard a truck engine. She knew the sound of her daddy's truck. It was loud and rattled. She heard it start and then drive away. Detective Hayes asked Emma what time that was. Emma said she did not know. She could not tell time yet, but it was still dark outside. Detective Hayes asked if Emma was sure she heard her father's truck. Emma said yes. Detective Hayes asked what happened after that. Emma said she went back to sleep. When she woke up again, it was light outside and her grandmother was there. The information was significant, but it was also delicate. Emma was 6 years old. Her testimony would be considered unreliable in court, especially given the passage of time and the stress she had been under. But it raised a crucial question. If Marcus's truck had started that morning, where had he gone? Clear's throat. Marcus Coleman drove a 1995 Ford F-150, blue, with a dent in the driver's side door and a muffler that was louder than it should have been. Neighbors would have heard it if it had started that morning. Detective Hayes went back to Petty Street and re-interviewed the neighbors. Mrs. Lorraine Gibson said she did not remember hearing a truck. Mr. Thomas Renfro said he had been in his garage at 6 in the morning, and he did not recall hearing Marcus's truck, though he admitted he had been focused on finding a tool and might not have noticed. There was another detail that Detective Hayes had overlooked initially. Marcus's truck had been in the shop on June 13th, the day before Jessica disappeared. Marcus had taken it in for an oil change and to have the brakes checked. The receipt from the garage showed he picked the truck up at 4:30 in the afternoon. The mechanic, a man named Eddie Grant, remembered Marcus because Marcus had seemed anxious, kept asking if the truck was ready, even though Eddie had told him it would take a couple of hours. Eddie said Marcus paced in the waiting area and did not sit down. When the truck was ready, Marcus paid in cash and drove off. Detective Hayes obtained the odometer reading from the garage's records. The truck had 112,341 miles on it when Marcus dropped it off. Detective Hayes went to the Coleman house in February 2006 and asked Marcus if he could look at his truck. Marcus said yes. The odometer now read 112,418 miles. That was 77 miles driven in the 8 months since June 13th. Marcus claimed he had barely driven the truck since Jessica disappeared. that he mostly took his mother's car to pick up Emma. But 77 miles in 8 months seemed low, even for someone who was not driving much. The investigation into Marcus intensified, but quietly. There was still no body. There was still no physical evidence tying Marcus to Jessica's disappearance. There was only a growing pile of inconsistencies, and a 6-year-old girl's statement that her father's truck had started that morning. Marcus and Linda's relationship deteriorated through the spring of 2006. Linda told her friends that she could not look at her son the same way anymore. She said she did not know what to believe, but she knew something was wrong. She filed for temporary custody of Emma in April, and Marcus did not contest it. He moved out of the house on Petty Street in May and rented a small apartment on the other side of town. He continued to work at the textile plant, but coworkers said he had become even more withdrawn. He did not speak unless spoken to. He ate lunch in his truck. The case remained cold for years. Detective Hayes retired in 2010, and the file was passed to Detective Maria Gonzalez, a 32-year-old investigator who had recently joined the sheriff's office. She reviewed the case from the beginning, reading every report, every witness statement, every piece of evidence. She found the same inconsistencies that had troubled Detective Hayes. The odometer reading, the timeline, Emma's statement about the truck, but she also found something else. In January 2012, nearly 7 years after Jessica's disappearance, Detective Gonzalez decided to re-interview Marcus. She called him and asked if he would come to the sheriff's office. Marcus said yes. He arrived on a gray afternoon, wearing the same type of clothes he always wore, jeans and a plaid shirt. Detective Gonzalez asked him to go through the morning of June 14, 2005, one more time. Marcus sighed. He said he had told this story so many times he could recite it in his sleep. But he told it again. He woke early. Jessica got up. She made coffee. She left for work. Detective Gonzalez asked Marcus if he had left the house that morning. Marcus said no. Detective Gonzalez asked if he was sure. Marcus said yes. Detective Gonzalez asked if his truck had started that morning. Marcus was quiet. Then he said he did not remember. Detective Gonzalez said Emma remembered hearing the truck start. Marcus said Emma was 6 years old at the time and had been through trauma. He said children remember things wrong. Detective Gonzalez said maybe. But she said it was curious that Marcus's truck had only 77 miles added to the odometer in 8 months after Jessica disappeared. Marcus said he had not driven much. Detective Gonzalez said that was convenient. The interview ended without resolution. Marcus left. Detective Gonzalez sat in her office and stared at the file. She knew Marcus was involved. She could feel it, but she could not prove it. Part 4. The revelation in November 2018, 13 years after Jessica Coleman vanished. Emma Coleman was 19 years old. She had graduated from high school the previous spring and was working at a grocery store in Gaffney while attending a community college part-time. She lived with her grandmother, Linda, who was now 73 and in declining health. Emma had grown into a quiet young woman, small and dark-haired like her mother, with the same reserved demeanor that people remembered Jessica having. Emma had not seen her father in over 5 years. Marcus had moved to Charlotte in 2013 and had cut off contact with his family. Linda received a Christmas card from him once, in 2014, with no return address and no message inside, just his signature. Emma told her grandmother she did not want to see him. She said she did not remember much about him, but what she did remember made her feel cold inside. In therapy, which Emma had started attending in her senior year of high school, she began to talk about the morning her mother disappeared. For years, she had pushed the memories down, buried them beneath layers of schoolwork and part-time jobs and the mechanics of daily life. But as she grew older, the memories surfaced with increasing clarity. She remembered waking up. She remembered hearing voices. She remembered the sound of her father's truck. And she remembered something else. Something she had not told anyone, not even Dr. Flynn all those years ago. She remembered getting out of bed and walking to her bedroom window. She remembered looking out and seeing her father's truck in the driveway. She remembered seeing someone in the passenger seat. She could not see who it was clearly because it was still dark, and the street light was at the other end of the block. But she remembered the shape of a person slumped over, not sitting up straight. She remembered her father getting into the driver's seat. She remembered the truck driving away. Clear's throat. Emma told her therapist this in a session on November 12, 2018. The therapist, Dr. Leonard Cross, listened carefully. He asked Emma if she was certain about what she had seen. Emma said she thought so, but she had been 6 years old, and she had spent so many years trying not to think about it that she could not be sure what was real and what her mind had created. Dr. Cross asked if Emma would be willing to speak with the police. Emma said she did not know. She said she was afraid. Dr. Cross, with Emma's permission, contacted Detective Gonzalez. They met at the sheriff's office on November 20th. Emma came with her grandmother. She sat in the same light blue room where she had sat 13 years earlier and told Detective Gonzalez what she remembered. The voices in the kitchen, the truck starting, looking out the window and seeing someone in the passenger seat, her father driving away. Detective Gonzalez asked Emma if she could describe the person in the passenger seat. Emma said no, only that they were not sitting up. Detective Gonzalez asked if Emma thought it was her mother. Emma said she did not know. She said it could have been. She said she had spent 13 years wondering. This new information gave Detective Gonzalez enough cause to reopen the investigation actively. She requested a warrant to search any properties associated with Marcus Coleman. Marcus was still living in Charlotte, but he had been renting the same small apartment for 5 years. In January 2019, officers executed the warrant. They searched the apartment. They found nothing of immediate interest, no evidence of Jessica, no blood, no hidden items. But they did find something else. In a storage unit that Marcus had been renting in Charlotte, officers found boxes of old belongings. Among them was a hunting rifle, a Remington Model 700 that Marcus had owned for years. The rifle had not been mentioned in the original investigation because Marcus had told officers he kept it at his brother's house. But here it was, in Marcus's storage unit. The rifle was seized and sent to the state forensics lab. Ballistics testing showed that the rifle had been fired relatively recently, within the past year. But more significant was what was found inside the barrel: microscopic traces of biological material. DNA testing confirmed that the material was human blood. Further testing confirmed that the DNA matched Jessica Marie Coleman. On March 4, 2019, Detective Gonzalez and 2 officers drove to Charlotte and arrested Marcus Coleman at his apartment. He was sitting on the couch watching television when they knocked on the door. He answered calmly. Detective Gonzalez said they had a warrant for his arrest. Marcus asked what the charge was. She said it was for the alleged involvement in the disappearance and suspected demise of Jessica Marie Coleman. Marcus did not react. He did not protest or ask questions. He simply nodded and held out his hands to be cuffed. The arrest made headlines across South Carolina. The media descended on Gaffney. Reporters stood outside the Cherokee County Courthouse and recounted the story of Jessica Coleman, who had vanished on a June morning 14 years earlier. They interviewed Dorothy Henderson, who was now 83 and still working at the peach stand. Dorothy said she had always known something was wrong, that Jessica would never have left her daughter willingly. They interviewed neighbors who remembered the search efforts and the vigils. They interviewed Emma briefly, who said only that she hoped her mother would finally have justice. The trial began in October 2019. Marcus Coleman pleaded not guilty. His defense attorney argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that the DNA on the rifle could have been transferred innocently, that Emma's testimony was unreliable given her age at the time and the years that had passed. The prosecution presented the timeline discrepancies, the odometer readings, Emma's testimony, and the DNA evidence. They argued that Marcus had taken his wife's life on the morning of June 14, 2005, placed her body in his truck, driven to a location unknown, disposed of the body, and then driven Jessica's car to the warehouse to stage a disappearance. The jury deliberated for 3 days. On November 8, 2019, they returned a guilty verdict on charges of second-degree wrongful ending of life. Marcus Coleman was sentenced to 30 years in prison. He showed no emotion as the verdict was read. He was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, and he did not look back. Jessica Marie Coleman's body has never been found. Investigators believe Marcus disposed of it in a location that may never be discovered, perhaps in the dense forests of Cherokee County or in the waters of the Broad River.